Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the starship Defiance. He looked at the big red zone on the screen in front of him. The dead zone was huge, covering 3 whole star systems. It was like a giant storm of red energy that never stopped, moving. For 200 years, no ship had ever come back from that place. Commander Lisa Park walked up to him with new reports. The Galactic Council had just sent their final warning to all humans. Morrison could still hear the alien ambassador's words in his head. Your people are young and stupid. The dead zone is not something you can beat. It is death itself. The other crew members on the bridge looked scared as Morrison read through the data. 17 different alien races had sent ships into the dead zone. All of them were lost. The powerful Krell Empire sent their biggest warships. The smart Zephyrians sent their best exploration teams. Even the ancient Vorthons, who had been traveling space for thousands of years, lost their ships there. Every single alien race had given up and marked the area as forbidden, but humans needed what was on the other side of the dead zone. Their long-range scanners had found huge amounts of energy crystals there. These crystals could power all of Earth's colonies for 1,000 years. Without them, human expansion into space would have to stop. Earth was running out of energy, and these crystals were the only answer. Navigation Officer Ryan Bell brought up the mission details on his screen. Captain, we have food and supplies for 6 months. If we can't find a way through by then, we'll be in trouble. Morrison nodded. He knew the risks. The Defiance had the best technology humans had ever built. It had new shields and a special hull that might protect them from the strange radiation in the dead zone. But they had never tested these things in real conditions. Space was full of surprises, and most of them were deadly. Chief Engineer Amy Watson finished checking all the ship systems. She came to Morrison with her report. Everything is working perfectly, Captain. But the energy readings from the edge of the dead zone are unlike anything I've ever seen. We don't really know what we're flying into. The dead zone looked like a wall of red mist from the outside. It stretched as far as their sensors could reach. Inside that mist, strange lights flickered and danced. Sometimes the lights looked almost like faces, screaming in pain. Morrison tried not to think about that too much. Dr. Alex Turner, the ship's science officer, had been studying the dead zone for months. He came to the bridge with his latest findings. Captain, I've analyzed every bit of data we have about this place. The energy patterns don't match anything in our science books. It's like the laws of physics work differently in there. The crew of the Defiance was made up of volunteers. Every person on the ship had asked to be part of this mission. They all knew they might never come home. Earth's government had made it clear that this was probably a one-way trip, but someone had to try. Communications Officer Kelly Brown was trying to stay in contact with Earth Command. The signals were already getting weaker as they got closer to the dead zone. Soon, they would be completely cut off from home. Captain, Earth Command is asking for a final status report before we lose contact. Morrison thought about what to say. How do you tell people back home that you're about to fly into something that has killed everyone who tried it before? How do you explain that you're doing it anyway because you have no choice? As the Defiance got closer to the dead zone, they started seeing the warning signs left by other races. Floating metal objects flashed messages in dozens of alien languages. The ship's computer translated them all, but they all said the same thing. Go back. Only death waits inside. Some of the warnings were very old. The computer found messages that were over 1,000 years old. Other races had been avoiding this place for a very long time. The warnings got more desperate as they got newer. Recent messages from the Krell Empire said things like, "We beg you, do not enter. We lost our entire fleet." Security Chief Nina Carter made sure all the crew members were ready for whatever might happen. She had studied the few reports that existed about the dead zone. Most ships that entered just disappeared, but a few had sent back strange messages before they were lost. The messages talked about crew members going crazy, seeing things that weren't there, and becoming so scared they couldn't function. Medical Officer Dr. Sam Rodriguez had prepared for psychological problems. He had drugs that might help if the crew started having mental breakdowns, but he wasn't sure if normal medicine would work against whatever was in the dead zone. Pilot Officer Tom Phillips was the best pilot in the human fleet. If anyone could fly a ship through impossible conditions, it was him. But even he looked nervous as they approached the edge of the red mist. "Captain, our navigation systems are already starting to act strange. Once we go in there, I'll be flying, blind most of the time." Morrison looked at his crew. These were the best people humanity had to offer. They were smart, brave, and dedicated. But would that be enough? Every alien race that had tried this had failed. The aliens were often more advanced than humans, with better technology and more experience in space. What made humans think they could succeed where everyone else had failed? The answer was simple. They had no choice. Earth needed those crystals, and the dead zone was the only way to get them. Sometimes you had to do impossible things because the alternative was even worse. As the Defiance reached the outer edge of the dead zone, Morrison took one last look at normal space behind them. The stars looked peaceful and familiar. Ahead of them was only the swirling red mist of the unknown. "All hands, this is the captain," Morrison announced over the ship's communication system. "We are about to enter the dead zone. Every alien race in the galaxy thinks we're crazy for trying this. They might be right, but we're going to do it anyway because that's what humans do. We don't give up when things look impossible." He paused and looked at his bridge crew one more time. "Take us in, Mr. Phillips." The Defiance moved forward into the red mist and normal space disappeared behind them. The moment the Defiance entered the dead zone, everything went wrong. The red mist wrapped around their ship like a living thing. All the computer screens started flashing error messages. The lights on the bridge flickered on and off. "Captain," Morrison felt like he was inside a nightmare that had come to life. Communications Officer Kelly Brown tried to contact Earth Command, but her equipment was making horrible screeching sounds. "Captain, I've lost all contact with home. The interference is so strong it's like the dead zone doesn't want us to talk to anyone outside." Dr. Alex Turner watched his science instruments go crazy. Numbers that should have been steady were jumping all over the place. "Captain, nothing in here makes sense. The energy readings are impossible. It's like the rules of science don't work in this place." For the first 12 hours, the crew tried to act like everything was normal. They did their jobs and tried not to think about the red mist swirling outside their windows. But the dead zone had other plans for them. Without any warning, the ship's gravity stopped working. One moment Morrison was standing on the bridge, and the next moment he was floating in the air. Coffee cups, papers, and tools started flying around the room. Crew members crashed into walls and ceilings. "Emergency!" Chief Engineer Amy Watson shouted over the communication system. "Gravity generators are failing. Power is fluctuating throughout the ship." The emergency lights came on, bathing everything in red light that matched the mist outside. It made the floating crew members look like ghosts. Watson worked as fast as she could to fix the gravity, but every time she fixed one problem, two more appeared. Medical Officer Dr. Sam Rodriguez started getting strange reports from crew members. People were seeing things that weren't there. Some crew members said they saw dead relatives walking through the corridors. Others reported hearing voices calling their names from empty rooms. "Captain," Rodriguez said privately to Morrison, "this isn't just affecting our equipment. The dead zone is doing something to our minds too." 3 crew members have reported seeing their worst memories played out in front of them like movies. Morrison felt it too. Sometimes he would see his father, who had died when Morrison was young. His father would look at him with disappointed eyes and ask why Morrison was leading good people to their deaths. Morrison knew it wasn't real, but it felt real enough to make his hands shake. Security Chief Nina Carter tried to help crew members who were having mental problems. She organized teams to check on everyone and make sure nobody was alone. But Carter was fighting her own battles. The dead zone kept showing her images of times she had failed to protect people. She saw the faces of soldiers who had died under her command years ago. But something strange started to happen after the first few days. The human crew began to adapt to the impossible conditions. Where other alien races might have panicked completely, the humans started finding ways to work around the problems. Pilot Officer Tom Phillips discovered that he could still fly the ship, even though most of his instruments weren't working. He started using his instincts instead of relying on computers. The interference isn't completely random, he told Morrison. There's a pattern to it. I can feel when the energy waves are coming. Phillips began to navigate by watching the way the red mist moved outside their windows. He learned to read the currents of energy like an old sailor reading ocean waves. It shouldn't have been possible, but it worked. Chief Watson made an amazing discovery while trying to repair their computers. The ship's main computer, which was designed to calculate faster-than-light jumps, could actually understand some of the dead zone's energy patterns. "Captain, this is incredible," Watson explained. "The dead zone has its own language. Our computer can't translate it into words, but it can predict what the energy will do next. It's like the mist is trying to communicate with us." Watson worked day and night to program the computer to work with the dead zone instead of fighting against it. Slowly, the ship's systems began to stabilize. The gravity came back on. The lights stopped flickering. They were still in terrible danger, but they were surviving. Dr. Turner noticed something that no alien race had ever reported. "Captain, the crew is adapting to the psychological attacks. At first, everyone was terrified by the visions and voices, but now people are learning to ignore them or even talk back to them. Crew members started treating the hallucinations like annoying neighbors. When someone saw a vision of their worst fear, other crew members would remind them it wasn't real. They developed jokes and songs to fight off the depression that the dead zone tried to force on them." "The aliens probably gave up," Carter observed. "When they saw impossible things and heard voices, they likely thought they were going insane. But humans are used to dealing with stress and fear. We don't quit just because things get scary." After a week in the dead zone, Morrison realized why no other race had survived. The dead zone didn't just attack ships with weapons or radiation. It attacked hope itself. It tried to make people believe that there was no point in continuing, that they should just give up and die. But humans had something that other races might not have had. They had stubbornness. When the dead zone told them to give up, they said no. When it showed them their worst fears, they faced those fears and kept going anyway. "We're not just surviving," Morrison told his crew during their daily meeting. "We're learning to fight back against something that's supposed to be impossible to fight. Every day we stay alive in here is a victory." The red mist outside continued to swirl and pulse with angry energy. But inside the Defiance, the human crew was proving that sometimes the best way to deal with the impossible is to refuse to believe it's impossible. 3 weeks into their journey through the dead zone, the crew of the Defiance discovered something that made their blood run cold. Captain Morrison stood on the bridge, staring at the screen that showed what lay ahead of them. It was a graveyard of spaceships floating in the red mist. "My God," whispered Navigation Officer Ryan Bell. "There must be hundreds of them." The dead ships stretched out as far as their sensors could reach. Some were huge warships that could have destroyed entire planets. Others were small exploration vessels like their own. All of them were dark and silent, drifting like ghosts in the crimson fog. Dr. Alex Turner scanned the nearest ships with what instruments still worked. "Captain, the hulls are intact. No signs of weapon damage or explosions. Whatever killed these crews, it wasn't a fight." Morrison made a decision that he knew was dangerous but necessary. "We need to board one of those ships and find out what happened. If we're going to survive this place, we need to understand how they died." Chief Engineer Amy Watson picked out a large alien ship that looked like it belonged to the Krell Empire. The Krell were known throughout the galaxy as fierce warriors who never gave up in battle. If something could defeat them, it was something to be very afraid of. Morrison led a small team over to the dead ship. Security Chief Nina Carter, Dr. Turner, and Medical Officer Dr. Sam Rodriguez came with him. They put on their spacesuits and flew across the gap between the ships in a small shuttle. The alien ship was like a tomb. The lights were out, and everything was covered in a thin layer of red dust that seemed to glow faintly. Their footsteps echoed in the empty corridors as they made their way to the bridge. What they found there was both terrifying and puzzling. The alien crew was still at their stations, but they were all dead. They hadn't been killed by weapons or disease. They looked like they had simply given up and died of despair. Dr. Rodriguez examined the bodies while Turner downloaded data from the ship's computers. These aliens died of what looks like complete mental breakdown, Rodriguez reported. Their hearts just stopped beating as if they lost the will to live. Turner found the ship's final log entries and translated them. The story they told was heartbreaking. The Krell crew had entered the dead zone with confidence, expecting to fight their way through any danger. But instead of enemies they could shoot at, they found something that attacked their minds. "Listen to this," Turner said, reading from the log. Day 12. "The voices are getting louder. They tell us we are failures that we will never see home again. Some of the crew have stopped eating." Day 15. "Half the crew won't leave their beds. They just stare at the walls and cry." Day 18. "I can't remember why we came here. Nothing matters anymore." The final entry was the most chilling of all. Day 20. "We are turning off all systems and waiting for death. The red mist has won. We surrender." Morrison felt a chill run down his spine. The alien crew had given up completely. The dead zone had broken their spirits so thoroughly that they chose to die rather than keep fighting. But as the human team explored more of the dead ship, they found something else. In the ship's database, they discovered detailed maps of the dead zone. The alien crew had been carefully recording safe passages and dangerous areas right up until the end. "Captain," Turner said excitedly, "these aliens figured out how to navigate through the dead zone. They found paths that avoid the worst energy storms, but they gave up before they could use this information to escape." Morrison realized something important. The alien crews hadn't died because the dead zone was impossible to navigate. They had died because they lost hope. When things got difficult, they simply quit trying. Back on the Defiance, Morrison shared what they had learned with his crew. The reaction was different from what he expected. Instead of being scared, the crew seemed angry. "Those aliens gave up," said Pilot Officer Tom Phillips. "They had the information they needed to get through, but they quit." Communications Officer Kelly Brown was working on her equipment, even though she knew it was mostly useless. "I don't understand how anyone can just stop trying. Even if we die in here, at least we'll die fighting." Chief Watson had been studying the alien navigation data. She made a discovery that changed everything. "Captain, the energy crystals we're looking for aren't just on the other side of the dead zone. They're everywhere in here. The whole nebula is made of crystallized energy." This explained a lot. The dead zone wasn't just hiding the crystals they needed. It was made of them. The red mist that had killed so many alien crews was actually pure energy in its most basic form. It was the source of unlimited power, but it was also incredibly dangerous to minds that couldn't handle uncertainty. "The aliens failed because they needed everything to make sense," Watson explained. "Their technology, their society, their way of thinking. It all depended on having clear rules and logical explanations. But the dead zone doesn't follow any rules. It changes constantly and you have to change with it." Humans, Morrison realized, were different. They were used to dealing with things that didn't make sense. Human history was full of people who succeeded by refusing to give up when everyone said something was impossible. As the Defiance continued deeper into the dead zone, the crew faced new challenges. The red mist began to sing, a horrible sound that made people want to lie down and never get up again. The singing crystals that floated in the mist were trying to break their will to live, but the human crew found ways to fight back. They sang their own songs to drown out the crystal voices. They told jokes to keep their spirits up. They reminded each other of home and all the reasons they had to keep fighting. "The aliens were wrong about this place," Morrison told his crew during their daily meeting. "They thought the dead zone was pure evil, something that wanted to destroy all life. But I think it's more like a test. It's asking us if we really want to survive badly enough to never give up." The crew was tired and scared, but they were still fighting. Unlike the alien crews who had come before them, the humans refused to surrender to despair. As they approached the very center of the dead zone, Morrison knew they were about to face their greatest test yet. The energy readings were off the charts and the psychological attacks were getting stronger, but his crew was ready. They had learned something that no alien race had understood. The dead zone could be survived, but only by people who refused to believe that anything was truly impossible. Captain Morrison stood on the bridge of the Defiance as they approached the very center of the dead zone. The red mist around them was so thick now that they couldn't see more than a few feet outside their windows. The energy readings were going crazy, and the singing of the crystal formations was getting louder and more terrible. "Captain," said Pilot Officer Tom Phillips, "I can barely control the ship. The energy currents are pulling us in different directions at the same time." The singing crystals were the worst thing they had faced yet. The sound went right through their ears and into their brains, trying to convince them that life was pointless, and they should just give up. Several crew members had to be helped to their rooms because they couldn't stop crying, but Chief Engineer Amy Watson had been studying the crystal formations, and she made an incredible discovery. "Captain, these aren't just making noise to hurt us. They're trying to communicate. The song has patterns in it like a language." Watson worked with Dr. Alex Turner to decode the crystal songs. What they found changed everything they thought they knew about the dead zone. The crystals weren't evil. They were trying to preserve the memories and knowledge of everyone who had died in the dead zone. "The crystals are like libraries," Turner explained to Morrison. "Every alien crew that died here had their final thoughts and discoveries recorded in these formations. The dead zone has been collecting information for thousands of years. This meant that somewhere in the crystal songs were the navigation routes that could lead them safely through the dead zone. The alien crews had figured out safe paths before they died, and that information was still here, waiting to be found." Watson and Turner worked together to filter out the sadness and despair from the crystal songs, focusing only on the navigation data. It was like trying to find a whisper in a thunderstorm, but slowly they began to understand the patterns. "Got it," Watson shouted after hours of work. "Captain, I found the safe routes. The aliens discovered paths through the worst parts of the dead zone, but they gave up before they could use them." Morrison made a decision that would change the course of their mission. Instead of trying to fight their way through the center of the dead zone, they would follow the routes discovered by the dead alien crews. It felt wrong to use the knowledge of people who had died, but Morrison knew those aliens would want their discoveries to save lives. The new route was strange and winding. It took them through areas where the red mist was thin and the energy storms were weaker. Phillips had to fly the ship in patterns that seemed to make no sense, following invisible currents that only the crystals could detect. "This is impossible," Phillips muttered as he followed the crystal guidance. "We're flying in spirals and loops. No normal navigation would work like this." But it was working. The Defiance moved through the heart of the dead zone without being torn apart by energy storms. The singing crystals guided them past the most dangerous areas, and slowly the red mist began to thin. After what felt like forever, they saw something that made the whole crew cheer. Ahead of them was a wall of clear space. Stars were shining beyond the edge of the dead zone. They had made it through, but their journey wasn't over yet. On the far side of the dead zone, they found the largest collection of energy crystals anyone had ever seen. Floating mountains of pure power stretched as far as their sensors could reach. These crystals could power not just Earth's colonies, but the entire galaxy for millions of years. The crew worked quickly to harvest as many crystals as they could carry. They knew that their return trip through the dead zone would be just as dangerous as their first journey. But something had changed. During their passage, the crew moved with confidence now. They had survived the impossible, and they knew they could do it again. Chief Watson made another amazing discovery while studying the harvested crystals. "Captain, these crystals aren't just power sources. They contain detailed maps of every safe route through the dead zone. We now have enough information to guide other ships through safely." The return journey was faster than their entry. Following the crystal maps, the Defiance took routes that avoided the worst areas of the dead zone. What had taken them weeks to navigate the first time now took only days. They knew the secret paths that no other race had ever discovered. When the Defiance finally emerged from the dead zone, they found a shocking sight waiting for them. A huge fleet of alien ships was positioned outside the red mist. Ships from the Galactic Council, the Krell Empire, the Zephyrian Federation, and dozens of other races. They were all waiting to collect whatever pieces of the human ship they could find. The alien commanders couldn't believe their eyes when the Defiance appeared, intact and undamaged. For several minutes, nobody said anything. The idea that someone had actually survived the dead zone was too incredible to accept. Ambassador Chen from the Galactic Council was the first to recover from the shock. His ship docked with the Defiance, and he came aboard with a team of alien scientists and officials. "This is impossible," Chen said as he walked through the corridors of the human ship. "No one survives the dead zone. How are you still alive?" "Captain," Morrison smiled as he led the alien delegation to see the cargo holds full of energy crystals. "We survived the same way humans always survive impossible things. We refused to believe they were impossible." The aliens examined the crystals and the navigation data that the Defiance had brought back. The information was worth more than all the treasure in the galaxy. For the first time in galactic history, there was a safe way to cross the dead zone. But the aliens also realized something else. The routes through the dead zone required a special kind of thinking, a flexibility of mind that most alien races didn't have. The paths changed constantly, and pilots had to adapt quickly to new conditions. It was the kind of challenge that humans were naturally good at. In the weeks that followed, news of the Defiance's success spread throughout the galaxy. The human crew became legendary heroes, but they knew the real story was more complex. They hadn't succeeded because they were stronger or smarter than the aliens who had died before them. They had succeeded because humans had a special gift: the ability to keep hoping even when hope seemed foolish. While other races gave up when faced with the impossible, humans just got more stubborn. The dead zone was given a new name by the galactic community. They started calling it the Human Road, acknowledging that while it remained deadly for most species, there was one race crazy enough to find a way through. More human ships began making the journey, following the routes mapped by the Defiance. Each successful crossing brought back more crystals and more knowledge about the strange region of space that had terrified the galaxy for so long. The crew of the Defiance had done more than just survive the dead zone. They had proven something that would change how the galaxy saw humanity forever. Humans didn't just explore the unknown. They turned the impossible into the possible, one stubborn step at a time. And in the depths of space, the dead zone continued to swirl with its red mist and singing crystals. But now it was no longer a place of death. It had become a bridge to the future, opened by people who refused to accept that some things couldn't be done.